Ryan joins us now from Janesville, Wisconsin, to talk about the IRS scandal and President Obama's other problems. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good morning.
Well, let's start with your question to Acting Commissioner Miller. Why do you think that he and other top officials did not tell Congress when they learned a year ago, in May of 2012, about the political targeting of conservative groups? Do you think this was just a bureaucracy trying to protect itself, or do you think it had something to do with the fact that we were right in the middle of a presidential campaign?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not going to necessarily speculate. We're going to investigate and find the answer to that question. Chris, what we do now know is that for roughly 2 years, the IRS was targeting Americans based upon their political beliefs. What we do now know is that the IRS misled Congress. You have to understand, the Ways and Means Committee opened this investigation about 2 years ago, asked repeatedly these questions to the IRS, and they withheld this information from Congress. So that's what we now know. So we're going to continue this investigation to get to the bottom of this. Who knew? When did they know? Why did they do this? How high up in government did it go? I mean, look, people have no trust that their government is being impartial. This is arrogance of power, abuse of power to the nth degree. And we're going to get to the bottom of this. And so I don't know the answer to your question, and we're going to find out.
You just heard Dan Pfeiffer. He says that nobody in the White House knew about this until the IG's report was relayed to them in late April, or the fact of it was relayed to the White House counsel. Do you have any evidence that information about the political targeting of conservatives went either to the Treasury Department or to White House officials before what the White House is saying?
We don't know the answer to that. This is just the beginning of this investigation. Remember, the Inspector General just did an audit. They didn't do an investigation, like emails and things like that. The Inspector General told us at the hearing that now they are in the midst of an investigation, and what we received the other day is an audit which revealed that they misled Congress, that they were in fact targeting people on their political beliefs. We have credible allegations that donors were harassed and intimidated.
Let me interrupt for a minute, because I'm not quite sure
are involved. So the point is, Chris,
what is the difference
we're just beginning this investigation. We don't know the answer to that.
What's the difference between an audit and an investigation? What are you saying they've done? What are you saying they haven't done?
Well, an audit is a measurement of behavior and what actually occurred, but an investigation, they didn't look at emails, they didn't look at intent, they didn't look at who was in the chain of information. So none of that information has been acquired yet. That's what the IG is doing now. That's what our congressional overseers are doing now as well. So all we have is a simple audit. We don't have a thorough investigation. That's not the report we got. That is what is now occurring. So we just don't have the answers to all those questions, and that's what we're going to find out.
During the hearing on Friday, Commissioner Miller said that the targeting of conservative groups, the Tea Party and other conservative groups, was simply a bureaucratic effort, an efficiency move, as you will, to try to deal with this big spike in groups, political groups, after the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling, who were asking for tax-exempt status. And I want to go to the Inspector General's report on that, because he said that 298 groups received special scrutiny. Of those, 96 were Tea Party-type groups. That means then, Congressman, that 2/3 of the groups that received special scrutiny were not Tea Party-type groups.
Chris, what we also know from just this one hearing is that groups with the word progressives or organizing, groups with liberal persuasion, did not have this targeting. They went through. They were approved. So we know that they specifically targeted people based on their political beliefs, based on people who had suspicion of the size and direction of government, based on Tea Party and 9/12 and word patriots. So we know for sure they targeted people based on their political beliefs. We've got allegations based on, religious beliefs that were contrary to the president's positions. We have credible allegations that donors to these groups were targeted. We know that the IRS leaked private confidential information to the public for which served political purposes. So there's so much more that we have just uncovered that we do not know the root causes of. And so to suggest that this is some bureaucratic snafu, that's already been disproven, Chris. The other point I'd say is, as bad as this is, the person in charge of this bureaucratic snafu has now been put in charge of implementing Obamacare. I mean, the IRS now is going to be granted huge amounts of unprecedented power over our health care in the implementation of Obamacare. And so this is just rotten to the core. This is arrogance. This is big government cronyism. And this is not what hardworking taxpayers deserve. People deserve a government that they can trust, that's honest, that's impartial, equality before the law, and that is not what we're getting here. And so to try and suggest that this is just bureaucratic snafus, we already know that that is not true.
Congressman, let's turn to Benghazi. You say, and you said this week, there's no doubt that the Obama administration, your words, no doubt, engaged in a cover-up of Benghazi in their use of the talking points. But President Obama pointed out this week that Susan Rice appeared on the Sunday talk shows, and just 3 days later, Matt Olson, head of the National Counterterrorism Center, told Congress that it was an act of terror. Take a look at what the president said.
Who executes some sort of cover-up or effort to tamp things down for 3 days? So the whole thing defies logic.
Congressman, does the president have a point there, a 3-day cover-up?
Look, Chris, what we now know from congressional testimony is that the #2 man in Benghazi, the deputy chief of mission, informed his superiors, including the Secretary of State, that this was a terrorist attack. Those of us who have had the briefings and seen the videos know that there was no protest involved. And to suggest afterwards that this was the result of a spontaneous protest, we know is now not the case. And so the burden of proof here is on the administration side. And it is, why did they continue to push this kind of a story when they knew nearly immediately afterwards that that was not the case? So that's really the question. And by the way, they released some emails, not everything. We've only seen parts of this story. And the point here, Chris, is not that this is not a partisan endeavor. This is a, what is the truth and why was the truth intentionally distorted? And we want to make sure that something like this never happens again. People deserve honest government. People deserve to be told the truth by their government, and that's not the kind of thing that we're getting here, whether it's the HHS, whether it's the IRS, or whether it's the State Department.
Congressman, you say that it's not partisan, but the fact is you had a big stake in all this, because at the very time that all of the talking points about Benghazi came down, you were Mitt Romney's running mate trying to unseat President Obama. Do you believe that the White House purposely misled the American people on Benghazi to try to beat you and Mitt Romney and win the election?
I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm not even going to speculate, but that's what good oversight does. That is what this investigation is all about, which is, why did they continue to perpetuate this story, which they knew was not true, and what was the reason for doing so? So rather than make a conclusion before an investigation has been completed, I think we just need to investigate this for the sake of good government. This is what the legislative branch does. That's what the separation of powers is all about. Accountability of the executive branch by the legislative branch. And so I don't want to speculate as to why and what they did until we have all of the information. But I think what we know right now is that they were misleading.
We have less than 2 minutes left, Congressman. When you look at all these scandals, IRS, the subpoena of the AP records, Benghazi, and as I pointed out to Dan Pfeiffer, how often when these things come down, the president says, well, I just learned about it when everybody else did. What do you think it says about this president in his second term?
The way I look at this, Chris, you mentioned the last campaign. Governor Romney and I, we had to campaign against big government in theory. President Obama passed his agenda, but didn't implement his agenda. So we had to campaign against his rhetoric, his empty promises. Now we are seeing big government in practice. Now we are seeing the arrogance, we are seeing the cronyism in practice in this second term, and that is even uglier than big government in theory. And so this is what's disturbing about this, which is, you know, we had a challenge in campaigning against empty rhetoric. Now the country is seeing what this kind of big unlimited government does in practice. And that is not a pretty picture. This is why we had to do our jobs to bring accountability to the federal government, to bring trust back to the hardworking taxpayers. And unfortunately, I think we're going to go through a painful exercise in this country where we learn that these abuses are occurring and our rights as citizens are being infringed upon.
Congressman Ryan, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for coming in today and talking with us. Always a pleasure to talk with you, sir.
Thanks, Chris.
Coming up, we'll have more on